Okay, good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, February 12th, 2019 board meeting. The board has been in closed session since 6 o'clock for the reasons listed on the agenda. All 7 board members are present, and at this time we will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have 2 recognitions tonight. The first is the Illinois American String Teachers Association Outstanding Educator Award, Mr. Ray Ostwald. So if you could come up and stand in the center.
Good evening. I'm Erin DeLuga, principal at York. It's my honor to recognize Ray Ostwald for receiving the American String Teachers Association Educator of the Year Award. Having taught orchestra for 27 years and 23 of them being here at York, Ray is a role model and a mentor for our students, his colleagues, all in orchestra and across all of our music programs. He is often asked to be guest conductor across the Midwest and in other regions across the country. He's a published author, an accomplished musician, and a favored colleague of mine. What an amazing honor. Congratulations, Ray.
So before, wait, we're not done yet. Thanks a lot, Erin, for leading off. I have the board's proclamation, but let me just say this. This is another example of a stellar member of an amazing team of music educators in this community, and this one gets recognized tonight. And everybody on that team knows what a key part you are to that. And we're happy to have you. So let me start. We're not reading the entire thing anymore. I'm going to start with the meat of the proclamation. There's more here. It says, whereas the American String Teachers Association has announced that Ray Ostwald, orchestra director at York Community High School, has received the prestigious 2019 Outstanding Educator Award. And whereas Ashley Tucker, York High School teacher, noted, quote, as a former student, I can attest to his talent. Ray is truly a phenomenally talented and wonderful music educator. I still have so many fond memories of the music we played, our performances, the trips and clinicians and ensembles, end quote. And whereas this award recognizes orchestra directors and teachers who have demonstrated positive impact on their students and community, and Ray Ostwald was honored during the ILASTA Awards banquet at the Peoria Civic Center Theater on January 25th, 2019. And whereas this accomplishment brings pride and prestige to Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205, York Community High School, and to the community, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 express deep appreciation and congratulations to Ray Ostwald for his outstanding accomplishments. Thank you.
Next, we have a Shining Star recipient. I don't have the name, so. David, if you're here, could you come? Thank you.
I'll turn on the mic. David Polko, Technology Assistant at Sandburg Middle School, nominated by student Stevenson and Linda Fehrenbacher. They write, today, David goes above and beyond each day to provide the best technology assistance possible to the students and staff at Sandburg Middle School. Before the school year even began, David took it upon himself to make sure that all Chromebooks and carts were accounted for, organized, and assigned to students so that teachers could have their students access Chromebooks on the first day of school. This was an extremely large task to take on, but he committed himself to it on the first day on the job. Since then, it is clear that David sets extremely high expectations and standards for himself to ensure that all technology issues are handled in a professional and timely manner. In addition to holding himself to the highest standard, David has positively impacted the culture at Sandburg. Students and staff are comfortable approaching him with questions and requests as he treats everyone with the utmost respect and kindness. Mrs. Stevenson, Sandburg's librarian, is especially thankful to have David with her in the library because he is not afraid to share great ideas and to take risks to make the library a place that students and staff love to visit. He is truly a shining star. Congratulations.
Okay, at this time, the board will receive public comments for up to 3 minutes concerning items on this agenda, as well as communication, petitions, reports from citizens or representatives of other public agencies. I do not have anyone signed up. Is there anyone else that would like to do public comment? Okay, thank you. We will move on then to reports and presentations. First will be Dr. Cohen and Ms. DeLuga with blended learning presentation.
Good evening. We're here to talk a little bit about the blended learning pilot that we are going to launch next year at York High School, give you a little bit of background information on what that is and the benefits to our students. As you know, our vision is to have all students graduate college, career, and life ready. We do so by making sure our students have the 6 C skills and supporting them along the way. The blended learning pilot speaks especially to the college ready as well as the life ready components, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Our 3 learning and teaching priorities are listed here, and we've talked about these a lot. Blended learning specifically talks about instructional strategies. It is not a curriculum, and it can be adapted to almost any curriculum we offer. But it's an instructional strategy that allows the teachers to multiply their time by being able to create and facilitate learning experiences outside of the 50-minute period that they would have them during the day, and allow that 50 minutes to be freed up then for individual conferences and meetings with students that just need more. It is basically just a vehicle to deliver curriculum. It does not fundamentally change the curriculum. Most universities do incorporate some sort of online learning via some sort of learning management system. In a survey just in 2018 in the magazine Inside Higher Ed, 42% of faculty, college faculty, reported teaching a fully online course. So our students that are leaving York High School, graduating and moving on to college will be experiencing online learning and using some LMS like Blackboard or Moodle or Edmodo, things of that nature. It's also worth noting that many corporations now handle a lot of training and learning via a digital mode as well.
The issue we're addressing is engaging many students in traditional classes and not just some students. So we want to be able to give opportunity across the board at York. And so we're getting an opportunity into the hands of kids that's incorporating student choice and voice, which I think is super powerful. I was able to do this when I left Wheeling, the year before I left Wheeling and came to York, and it's caught on like fire. It creates opportunities for personalized support, and it is really a flexible way of scheduling, opening up opportunities for students, and it also is responsive to student pressure, anxiety, and stress. And what is blended learning? take that? Okay. It is the delivery model of instruction that includes flexible use of time and differentiation from teachers. The teacher instruction is a combination of students' days in class and days out where they might meet with the teacher if they need extra support, or they may be able to be on their own on those days off. The out-of-class learning days allows the teacher to bring in those small groups and differentiate, which I think is super powerful. The teacher is also able to use the flipped classroom model with blended learning, which I also think brings in technology in a very organic way into the course structure. The teacher does continue with students every day, and the students that may not need to be there but need additional support can either go to that teacher or can use supports like the math lab, the tutoring center for other courses that might free up their time as well.
I read a book actually titled Blended the year before I came to Elmhurst, about 2.5 years ago, that talks a little bit about how it's being implemented in a variety of school systems across the country, including Chicago Public Schools. It's worth noting blending learning is not new. It's been, been around really since the beginning of the one-to-one initiative. Districts have been starting to leverage technology to deliver instruction outside of the confines of the normal school day. But last fall, when I first came to the district, one of the programs we're trying to get off the ground was Project Lead the Way. So as part of that endeavor, I visited Huntley High School. Huntley is known for having actually the largest high school enrollment in Project Lead the Way in the state. And when I was there, I noticed a lot of students in the cafeteria, a lot of students in the media center, and unusually large for the time of day because the lunch periods weren't going on. And I asked why there were so many students out of class, and they said, well, it's those students are on their blended days. So to see it in action before we really started talking about it on a large scale here was great. We had the opportunity then to take a team there this fall. Ryan Doherty, several teachers, some folks from Learning and Teaching went to Huntley High School for one of their innovation days to kind of get a little more information on how they implement it. We've also reached out to several other districts. Naperville District 203, 67 has 67 blended learning options this year. The 67 numbers from Naperville North. Interestingly enough, there was an article just this past weekend about e-learning that appeared in the Naperville Sun, which is affiliated with the Chicago Tribune, talking about their blended learning and about the flexibility that we now have as part of the change in state law with the change in the definition of what a school day can be. I know there's some apprehension right now about maybe pulling a little bit of that back, but Naperville uses it to deliver a large number of classes. Barrington does. Huntley, again, we had the opportunity to visit Huntley. So different school districts use it to different degrees. I will tell you that the schools that we visited, Naperville, Huntley, they all do it on a voluntary basis. Teachers volunteer to teach these courses. They are a lot of work. And the article in the Chicago Tribune talks about that, because then the teacher that creates those online courses, or the online component that dovetails with those courses, has some work to do. They do have to put some time into creating that online content, but students enjoy it. They quoted several students in that article that talked about the flexibility that they have to schedule their time. So they know that they're responsible for putting in that time. But if they have a test later that day, they may take that blended period and use that to study for an assessment in another class. And then, come back to that, work that they have to do later on in the day when they come home. It gives them the opportunity to flex a little bit. Some students just need a break. When we went to Huntley, we saw some students that just had their earbuds in and were taking a little mental health break because they had the ability to flex their time again and do things when they, if they want to curl up at 9 o'clock at night at home in bed and get on their computer or get on their Chromebook and watch the video or do the online lesson, they had the ability to do that. Students that we talked to at Huntley and students that were quoted from Naperville as well talk about the college feel, about how it teaches them to prioritize, teaches them to manage their time. So these are things that other schools in the Chicagoland area have observed, and benefits we think that are going to come down the pike for our students.
The courses that we're going to focus on are Chicago Lit and Anatomy and Physiology senior electives, so that we can give that college feel to that group first. But in that previous slide, with those large number of course electives being fulfilled, that gives you the indicator of student success and student interest. The sections are also scheduled first and eighth period for flexibility, and the pilot outcomes are coming in development with the next slide, Mark, which will be our professional learning for our teachers and department chairs and coaches. It's going to be continuous twice monthly through video coaching for teachers and coaches. And Mark and Mary have been leading that charge with me and with Ryan Doherty, and also with the team. We've had some very exciting, at least student excitement in the potential of this, and teacher excitement in scaling it out over the next few years. So we're very hopeful that blended learning will kind of take on its own life. But for me, as the principal of York, I'm very concerned about personalized learning and making learning unique and effective for all students at York. And I think this is another layer that we can address that, in addition to emphasizing I think the way it addresses some of our students' anxiety and behavioral health needs by giving them that flexible choice. Is it for every student? No. So there are going to be students and parents that say, my student needs more structure, not less structure potentially, and that's okay. And so I think all of the schools that we visited, all of the schools we've talked to, certainly when I was working on the pilot at Wheeling, we had families that would take either path. And so we're looking forward to seeing how that plays out.
It's also worth noting that in terms of professional learning, Dr. Henderson, having come from Naperville prior to coming to Elmhurst, reached out to some of her former colleagues and talked a little bit with them about, what the professional learning they engaged in prior to launching blended learning. And they partnered with a group called Better Lesson that helped assist their teachers in creating the online content that complemented their blended learning courses. That also happened to be featured in that same newspaper article. And so in terms of communicating what blended learning is with families, we'll be doing information sessions this spring, both with students and with parents, so that they understand what the blended learning options are. Just because a student is signed up for Chicago Lit does not necessarily mean they want to be in a blended section. So they'll be offered the choice of traditional or blended courses. They will have the choice to opt in. And then communication expectations will be developed and given to parents and students that participate in the pilot. We will be getting their input throughout the process. And everything from, how did you feel about the pattern of days that were assigned? If we went with a standard A-B format, where A days, every student comes to class, and then B days are those days when the teacher's in the classroom, but the student attendance is optional. Optional provided, of course, that they're making satisfactory progress in the course. If a student's not making satisfactory progress in the course, then they are required to attend every day. How is that communication going to be given to students? Making sure that they understand where they stand in the course, but also that we're getting their feedback on everything from the content that's online and the quality of it, and also the ease of access via Google Classroom. It is our expectation this year that we are just going to continue with Google Classroom for the first year of this pilot, and most likely the second. Although many schools that have large blended learning programs, simply because of the amount of data that you then have to sift through, and the amount of information that gets exchanged in the assessments, do choose to bring in some form of a learning management system, either a Edmodo or Schoology or whatnot. And there are free versions depending on what our data needs are. So in summary, again, the concept of blended learning aligns with our emphasis on innovation, where we start talking about multiple modalities for learning and students learning in the way that they feel most comfortable. Some students that have the ability to just clip through material and just want to get things done and move on have that option. Other students will require more structure. Some students will want to have more time, individual time with a teacher, and blended learning gives them the opportunity to meet with in a small group with a teacher every other day. The emphasis on behavioral health gets addressed by blended learning because students are able to be flexible with their own schedules and pace themselves. And we will be surveying them about their satisfaction. Although based on our research and talking to students from other school districts that have already implemented blended learning, those students that try it really like it. And they feel that it gives them confidence in going into the less structured college experience. And in terms of responsive teaching, it gives us the opportunity, again, to intervene with students that need more. Sometimes that means more time. Other times that just means a little more pushing or nudging, if you will, if they're they need a little help with their work. Sometimes the students that need to be challenged more because they're already mastering the content, we can push them a little bit higher. And again, we will be tracking student success along the way to look at how to make sure our students are progressing the way they should be, and at the end of the day, making sure that their students in our blended sections are performing at the same level academically that the students in the non-blended sections are. I know that it's a comparison that was done at Huntley, and they shared with us that just like there may be variability between classes, plus or minus 2 or 3%, they don't see any difference in their student performance, whether it's overall grades or common assessments in their blended classes versus their regular ones.
Mark, before you turn it over to questions, there's just one piece of information that I find very fascinating. We gave the number of courses at several of the schools that are either our typical comparison districts or maybe regional comparators, other high-performing high schools or whatever. But when Mark talked about Huntley and they gave the actual numbers of students, can you, because I think this speaks very highly of the student experience to see how this has taken off.
Yeah. So at Huntley High School, they tend to start with fewer blended offerings as freshmen. So I will start by saying that, because going from a middle school experience to a high school experience where you would kind of take the completely take the guardrails off may be a bit too much for freshmen, but many freshmen will take one blended class. But if you look at their overall population of just shy of 3,000 students, a little over 2,000 students are taking at least one blended class. And over 800 are taking 4 of their 7 classes in a blended format. Those students tend to be juniors and seniors, but those blended options are very popular. And when you think, 2/3 of students choosing that modality, that speaks for itself. And again, it transforms a campus. Just being able to walk around and see students, it looks like a small college atmosphere, and it really does encourage that sort of self-starting, self-regulation that, our students need to be successful. So with that, I'll open up to any questions.
I just wanted to say, well, first of all, thank you. But, we're talking behavioral health is coming up, and this looks like something, I have high schoolers, and giving them a little of almost control or power, and also you're teaching them to manage time. Mm-hmm. Which is huge.
But still keeps the guardrails on.
Yes.
It's not like when they go to college and if you don't know as a parent if they're falling apart until
Which
they
is my
come
concern.
home with their stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Right, which nobody ever wants that as a parent.
Right, and Kara, there is a little of that the students are taught to manage that time, and I think that does help in the transfers into their post-secondary, especially in college where you do have classes that meet every other day, and might have a professor that says, well, we're not going to meet today, but these are the expectations, and this is how I can support you.
So I love when you're looking at it from students and what it can do for them, but I guess then the flip side of that is the teacher side. I think you mentioned people, they maybe are volunteering, but is there like an enthusiasm? I mean, this is a different, you're giving up 5 days, having those students 5 days. I've got to restructure how I think about what I'm asking them to do because I won't see them every day. So I don't know, can you just speak to that a little bit? It's not a very good question, but I think you know it.
Well, our Chicago Lit teacher is also an instructional coach, and so she's excited. She's done a ton of research, of course, because in her instructional coaching, she wants to be able to help other teachers scale. And then anatomy and phys, they often are out in the field. and they are working with in nursing homes and in long-term care facilities. And so the ability to blend that course is going to give that teacher the opportunity to be able to ignite innovation with those students in a variety of ways. She's thought through some amazing units that the students would do out in the field, and has given some anecdotes of what her students think, this current year students think about the potential of this, if it were to happen, just to like play it out with the kids. So both are super excited. They're innovative. A lot of the department chairs have said now that there's rumblings, there's other teachers coming to the forefront saying, I want to be part of this. This is exciting. But certainly we want to be able to prove that it's effective for kids and for the teachers. And we're going to have to throw the teachers a lot of support. They're going to need time. They're going to need planning time. And we're working on that with Mark and Mary. They've been incredibly supportive. So I think that they feel very comfortable with the time and the planning that they're being given. It's just going to be looking at the course differently, because it's not marching through something. It's really seeing how each student is achieving, seeing how they're growing, and then setting the next benchmark, which is what ideally we want in a traditional classroom anyway, and I think that's exactly what we're working towards. So this gives us a structure to support that and to be able to start expanding and scaling it.
Great, thanks. And I would just personally like to see, some kind of, whether it's an exit interview, or a quick survey, nothing, we don't have to do some massive, but I think, both kids can be pretty insightful and reflective on, if it's good or it's working, and same with teachers, and it kind of gives that voice to how the process can refine and get better moving forward.
So this reminds me of differentiation. Yep. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of professional development, right, to get into our system, how we do that all the time, right? Yeah. So to the behavioral health, I can totally see that it gives flexibility and it could relieve some of the stress, but for that student who thinks that they're ready for this, but then finds out that they might not be, it actually creates more. So a lot of my questions are around, what does it look like? Can you give us an example of what it looks like? And then how we would transition, students moving in, right? What are some of the guardrails that we know that, so we can be, if this is a new concept for students and parents, they're going to have anxiety, right? So what are we communicating to give them a better picture of what this looks like? And then if they happen to have to transition back into the traditional mode, what do we do?
Well, the course outcomes are the same. The curriculum as it's delivered may look a little different, but it's still the same pieces. So at the end of a semester, let's say a student is in Chicagoland and it's not working for them, then they can move into the that same equivalent course non-blended, and they will have covered the same topics. So that so that's going to be there, and the 5-day option is always there. The teacher is there every day, so the teacher does not get that time off when the students aren't there. So if it's not working for that student and that student's struggling, we'll be able to identify that early. Additionally, the first several weeks of the course, now for the freshmen at Huntley, sometimes it's 5 or 6 weeks, are not blended. They are there the entire time. They will begin working on some of the online blended content, but they're going to do so in a supervised environment where they're going to have a teacher with them, and they can see how they're progressing, and I'm having trouble logging in, or this isn't coming up, or so they have an opportunity to work through any kinks and sort of see what it feels like. So they are supported along the way. So that first semester there's a lot of runway there before they have to take off and fly. So that there's going to be those safeguards.
And it also makes me think there's a lot of executive functioning skills that a student would have to have and might not. And I think, Erin, you alluded to it. Mm-hmm. How would we have time? What does that look like? How we're going to get those executive function skills taught, time management, organization, all of them, basically. Well, you're going to see them, whether they're sufficient or not, or how to help that student grow in those areas in order to be successful in the blended, which is good life skill all around person. Okay.
And I'm sorry we don't fit too well behind this podium together, so I'm just kind of sneaking in here. I think that we're going to have to assess that, but we're also talking on a larger scale with the whole staff about soft skills, and we're doing that through the Pathways Manufacturing Incubator. We're talking about that through Blended, but we're also talking about that generally for every student leaving high school with soft skills in addition to academic skills, because you can know everything in the whole world, but if you show up to an interview and cut off jean shorts and you don't make eye contact, you're out. So I think that it's pretty apparent to the teachers that we're trying to embed these things into what we're doing in our classrooms, and that we've talked a lot about it as a department chair, admin leadership team, as a district team to really start actualizing that and not just talking about it, but saying, what does that look like in the classroom? So for Blended, on the days that they are with the teacher, if they've earned their way out and choose to be out on the 2 days that they might be out, that teacher will also incorporate those types of skills into the courses. And that's why I think with the seniors, they're going to have more proximity and more accessibility and experience with some of that from freshman through junior year, so we can kind of use that as a launching pad before drilling it down.
You're embedding it into the curriculum. Okay, so I can see pros and cons to senioritis.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this, Karen, my daughter is 10 years old. She teaches herself off of YouTube all the time. Our students know how to learn digitally. They come to us primed and ready to do so. And so this is, it may not be for everyone. Right. And that's okay. And but this is one more, tool in the arsenal, so to speak, that we have to deliver content, and it allows students to learn at their own pace. If my daughter can learn to make slime and all that kind of good stuff, I'm sure we can, but it's about one of the teachers at Huntley put it really well. Out of all of the minutes that I have with my students, what do they not need me for? Mm-hmm. That's really how you approach the creation of this blended course. What is it that they can do independently? And how would they get those experiences? If they're working with partners and they're working on crafting a debate, all right, maybe they're doing for or against a particular topic. Well, on one day I'm going to meet with the for group, and the against group is going to be working in the media center, and then we switch. Mm-hmm. And so the teacher is providing that individualized instruction to those smaller groups of kids. And those other students can be working in Google Docs. They can be working in the side room in the Learning Commons. So we already have those structures in place to make that happen. So I think again, it gives us the ability to leverage the digital tools which the students and the teachers have had for years, but it does, you have to kind of take a global perspective of, okay, here are my outcomes, here are my objectives for the semester, and what is it that I can do outside of the classroom and deliver those without me giving it to them on a spoon.
So thank you. I think this is an excellent idea. I think it's a fabulous idea. We talked about, innovation. We talked about, behavioral health, flexibility, what else? Managing time, personalized learning, all of those key concepts, which tie directly to our all students graduate college, career, and life ready. So thank you very much for that. I also want to particularly thank you for highlighting what the students have said, because they're the ones that are going to be taking it. And you're absolutely right. They come, this is more of a learning for the adults, because the kids, they know how to do it, digital learning. I just completed a class on how to teach an online class. All the kids, they know that. It's the adults that are trying to figure this process out. So thank you for sharing that the students are ready for this. I think that's a key piece. Thank you also for highlighting how you're going to support the adults in getting ready for this. And I like the point that you made. It's not right for everyone, but everyone doesn't have to take it. That's right. But for those students who are ready, again, it's providing more options for them. And not to mention that it's, if they choose to go on to college, it's exactly what they're going to see in college. So why not have the opportunity to, come into that earlier. So again, I think this is a fabulous idea. I like the pilot idea. I'll be particularly interested. I expect it'll be wildly successful. That's my expectation. But I also appreciate Kara's point on, let's come back and report on that. Let's talk about how we measured that success and why we wanted to continue it. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah, I hate to throw water on the party. I was the one who sent the article about the legislation that's pending, and I noted in our Lend update that both the Senate and the House passed bills to reimpose the punch clock for 5 hours. You got to be in the building, got to be accountable 5 hours. I guess Springfield never saw an idea of innovation that it didn't want to squelch.
Well, the blended courses have existed prior to the change in the law that got rid of the 5 clock hour requirement. The 5 clock hour requirement was taken out of school code with the change in the funding formula. But now people see that, and you see these districts now that when they get canceled for weather are grabbing all these e-learning days and things of that nature. And the question is, are these impromptu e-learning days for everyone the same experience that they would have if they were in class all day? But blended learning predates that 5 clock hour requirement, and really the students are still responsible for putting in the time. If there's, Huntley has 47-minute periods versus York's 50, but what they say is the students, even if they're on a blended day, they have 47 minutes worth of work. And they keep attendance separately as well, so they have attendance for, if a student is on a blended day, they're blended absent or blended present. And if they're blended absent, they do have an open campus, but if, May students choose not to leave and they go down to the Learning Commons, they go out to the cafeteria, so they're doing their work. It is 2019. Eventually, this notion of Carnegie units and clock hours and a butt in the seat for 50 minutes does not mean they've learned anything, right? It doesn't mean that they've learned anything. So
Why should they enjoy it? We didn't.
exactly. So
I guess, and I put this and kind of buried in my email to you, was this idea is, let us do whatever policy is needed to make this work. Obviously, you're going to work around all these, hurdles that the state law is going to throw at you. But I think if we can give any help to you on this, it's an amazing, I agree with everything the board members said about this is the way to go. We ask this incredible staff to bring us new ideas, new things that make it child-centric, and you're doing it, and we appreciate it, and let us help you meet those challenges. So.
thanks, John.
Thank you.
Jim?
My questions are far more mundane than John's. How'd you pick these two classes? Just, it's who volunteered, or?
They're senior classes.
Okay.
So we have the opportunity to start with our students that are, again, getting ready for the college experience. They are electives. No student was required to take them. And then we had two teachers, again, that wanted to be a part of this process.
Jumped at the opportunity.
We also wanted to, we wanted to capture a wide variety of students.
Yes.
Yes.
So students that were college-bound or maybe not college-bound, students that were, typically maybe higher grade point average students, or students that maybe were more average grade point average students, because we didn't want this to be an exclusive experience for certain groups of students. We wanted as many different kinds of students as possible to have a chance to experience a blended course, and so not only did we think that was better for the students, but we thought it would give us a chance to learn more from it too, about what works for what different types of students and that kind of thing.
Thank you. Academic rigor, the students taking the same assessments and tests in both sections?
Yes.
Okay. And are there any kinds of subjects or topics that particularly lend themselves to blended learning?
It's surprising that when you look at some of the other districts that are doing it, like Naperville North, they have everything from family and consumer science and even PE, 4 different PE classes via blended. Students, how do you do PE outside of the school day? You wear a heart monitor and you report you log your activity. So for students that are involved in athletics, that's a slam dunk, right? Versus, so those things are, so they're all the way up through AP classes can be done in a blended format. There's really no one subject area or area that lends itself more to blended learning than another. When I think about the variety of classes that I had in college where we met 1 hour a day for 3 days, I did a lot of my classes that way. So really there's very few classes where you couldn't blend them. Performance classes, maybe not so much, like music classes, things of that nature, where you have large ensembles. Those things would be more challenging.
Yeah, it seems, over the years, over the past several decades, we've eliminated several options of world language at York. It seems like this would be a perfect way to give students more choice in more world languages. I mean, it seems like world language in particular lends itself to a blended format.
Sure, so long as the enrollment, I guess, is there to justify the, you know what I mean? So, and you'd have to have the certified staff, present to take care of it. But yes, absolutely, world language can absolutely be taught in a blended format.
Jim, you might be thinking a little bit more like there's all different kinds of ways to use technology, so you might be thinking more of like a distance learning type of a concept, or something where kids can access something that we don't specifically offer. That's a little bit, I don't know if that's what you were asking, but that's a little bit of a different kind of concept. Maybe I misunderstood too.
Maybe as usual, I'm already off on a tangent, but that's entirely possible.
The next step.
That's all I had.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. Never mind. Chris?
Daydream. Couple things. One, echo the thought. Thank you. And I love the idea of innovation through fast follower. The fact that others are out there that have worked out the kinks, and that we're putting this in here after we've learned from their mistakes. As a strategy, I think is a fantastic strategy for us. Question. I think you touched on this a little bit, but could you just speak to it for a second? The opportunities for differentiated learning, for different paces within classes. Can kids jump ahead, personalized kind of lessons based upon their pace?
Sure. For example, one of the English teachers that we met spoke to the fact that they had, groups of students coming in, but they'd be groups that all tended to, maybe they were at the same point with their writing. So they had some students that were really good writers, and she would have those students come in and peer review each other. Because if we're in a random group and I give, I might not be able to give you feedback if I don't understand what it is that you're writing, or maybe we're reading 3 different or 4 different books in English because we have choice over the novel that we're reading. So this, today we're going to meet with the students, I'm going to meet with the students that are reading All Quiet on the Western Front. And on Thursday, I'm going to meet with a different group of students that are reading a different novel, and we're going to talk about the paper that we're writing, but we're all approaching it from a different, with a different novel, let's say, is the basis of our paper. Yep. So you have the ability to target who it is that you want to meet with. It doesn't necessarily have to be volunteers. It can be, today I'm going to meet with this group. I'm going to meet with, if they're in, let's say we're going down the line and it's a blended course in industrial arts. Anybody who's working on this project, I'm going to meet with on Wednesday. So.
Sure, yeah. It makes intuitive sense that it would provide for more personalized learning experiences.
Teachers that have given feedback on this say that you would think that having students in the class fewer hours over the course of a year, that you wouldn't get to know your students as well. But they reported the opposite. Because they had so much small group contact with their students, they felt like they had better relationships. And the students felt that way as well.
Great. And then just platform. It sounds great. How do we make it work? Can you talk a little bit more about what we're going to use, or what LMS might look like? Or
Google Classroom is free. We already have it. We already use it. Google Classroom is almost a learning management system. It's a very effective way of delivering one-way content. It's a platform for housing everything. It's not great at getting data. It's not great at delivering assessments. There are tools for that. In my previous district, we used Schoology, but we used a free version in our math class just to do quick formative assessments. We then, teachers would then get that information from the system and dump that into their grade books. But the free version doesn't give you all the options. It's teacher by teacher can sign up. Doesn't give you all the big data options that if you were to pay for a learning management system. A learning management system could be up to $10 per student, depending how many bells and whistles you have. And at this point in time, PowerSchool just acquired a learning management system operator and is going to try and start incorporating that into the PowerSchool system. Dave Smith and I and Mary Ann met with them a little bit last year. Still very preliminary. I would say their product's still a little rough and the integration isn't there. But as we grow into blended learning, again, the more classes we incorporate, the bigger our data needs are going to be. And just in the last few years, you start seeing much more, it's more than just housing information. Now, there's a whole, side of these programs that have data analytics features to them and all that. So I think that once we get a little further down the line, if our needs change, then we'll start having to look and see whether or not we need to support them a little differently.
Sure. And I guess the other aspect of that, though, is a lot of these platforms, you talk about collaboration and the ability to connect, whether online or offline, in small groups, large groups, and whatnot. I mean, do we have those capabilities, or is this pretty much going to be?
Google Classroom does.
Yeah.
If I'm out, but if I'm on a out of classroom day, I'm pretty much doing solo learning at that point.
No, you can hang out, Google Hangouts. Yep. It's free.
Okay.
So it's a video conferencing. So you can have multiple people in. You can have, our own teachers right now collaborate across buildings doing that.
Okay, I guess my kids would be embarrassed I asked that question there.
No, that's okay.
So, all right, thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, special education program analysis. Mary Ann? Okay, well, thanks for having me here to talk about our first big program review. We literally just looked at this slide, so I'm going to just move ahead in the interests of time. And we'll come back actually a little bit to what this slide is about in any case. Why are we talking about a program review of special education? They're an important subgroup of our students, and we really want to make sure that we're taking a closer look at all of our programs. So this is, I think, a really good place for us to begin. Where does this program review analysis work fit within our learning and teaching priorities? It really fits in the space related to how we're measuring that district vision. Way back in the summer when we started talking about this work, I sat down with some district staff and also a group of parents, and we sort of mapped out a theory of action that outlines the outcomes we want to achieve with our special education services. And they really begin back with that slide that I skipped over, the triangle slide that comes back to the long-term outcomes that we want for our students, which are that they'll become college, career, and life ready. So we start with that, but then we also back map to make sure that we are accounting for learning and progress along the way. And then there's some related outcomes that we thought were relevant to look at related to student engagement, satisfaction, and sort of sense of support in the services that they're receiving, that we thought those would also be good outcomes to look at. And we basically said, okay, well, our theory of action is if we do a good job designing and delivering our services, then these are the outcomes that we would expect to achieve. So that theory of action then really helps us frame what the review of special education services looks like, because if we are saying that what we want to do is design and deliver services well, then the first set of questions we want to ask ourselves is, well, are we doing that? So are we doing the activities that we said we were going to do? How well are we doing them? What are some areas of strength and improvement, and so on? And then the second set of questions will be around those outcomes and to what extent they're being achieved at least so far.
One of the challenges with thinking about special education services is that that's a really broad topic, and so I came up with this sort of framework or model for what that means to sort of help get into the specific questions that we would want to answer with a special education program review. So all this does is kind of break down special education services into some buckets, and then we can sort of look at how we're doing within each of those elements. So that begins with, and it kind of follows the process of the delivery of special education services. So it begins with identification of students and they're becoming eligible for services. Then you move into the development of an individualized education program, or the IEP, placing of students, instruction, and you end up with students transitioning either within their school, across schools. And that arrow at the bottom reflects what we expect to be happening along the way, which is communication and collaboration among staff, and then also communication and collaboration among staff and families. So what we're going to do today is really walk through all of the work that we've done so far to look at that theory of action and how we're doing with it. This just reiterates, again, the questions, and the reason I put them back here is because now I'm going to tell you that these are all of the data that we collected to answer and address those questions. And it was a lot of data from a lot of different sources. So we did interviews with all the principals and district staff. That includes our supervisors, coaches, and so on. We did online thought exchanges with 7 different stakeholder groups, which ultimately resulted in about 638 people participating, and over 1,000 comments. I read and coded every single one of them. So I can tell you that was a lot of information. We also collected and analyzed a lot of existing district data that we have about students. So what kinds of courses they're taking, their perceptions about things, attendance data, discipline data. We have a lot of different data, so we looked at a lot of that data as well. And we did some original data analysis looking specifically at student IEPs as well. So from my point of view, at least, it was a fairly comprehensive set of data that we are looking at today. There are still, however, some things that we wanted to collect some more information about, and I'll talk a little bit about what else we still want to do with that. So before we get into the specifics of kind of the findings of that program review, I just wanted to do a background of what our special education population looks like. So who is receiving services, who is delivering services, and how, just so you kind of have that for background and context. Some of this you've seen before and you probably are familiar with, but I just thought it would be a helpful way to get started. So across the district, we have over 1,200 students who are receiving special education services. The number varies across the year as students come in and out. That represents about 13.7% of our students, which is pretty comparable to our peer districts. So they range from sort of a low of 11% all the way up to 17%, and most of them are in that kind of 13 to 14% range. So we're kind of right there with our peers. I know this is a little bit hard to read here. The bar on the left is just telling you that by school, the largest number of students we have receiving services is at York, and that's just a function of the size of the school. Proportionally speaking, that next largest bar that you see all the way to the right, the greatest proportion of students that we have receiving services is actually at Madison, at preschool. So we're sort of hitting both ends of the spectrum there. You'll see all the percentages of students receiving services at our other schools. They tend to vary a little bit depending on the specific programs that those schools have. The most common kind of disability that students are receiving services for is a speech or language impairment. And again, that reflects the fact that the majority of our students who are receiving services are actually at the early grades, and especially in preschool. You'll see the smallest bar here, way at the bottom, is students who have an orthopedic impairment. When we look at these numbers compared to our peers, we have smaller percentages of students with intellectual disabilities and specific learning disabilities, which is kind of an interesting pattern. But we have more students with some of the other disability types, and especially the other health impairment, which you'll see for us is the second largest bar that we have here. On average, our students receive services for 3 to 5 years. So we have those students who are transitioning out tend to have received services for a couple of years. We had 74 students transition out of services last year, and the numbers over the past couple of years have been fairly similar, ranging from 70 to 90 or so students. I know that you have seen this slide before. It just shows the types of settings in which our students receive services, which range everywhere from being in a fully self-contained environment to being fully included in general education. We have obviously inclusion, push-in, and pull-out support happening at all of our schools. We have co-teaching happening now at our middle schools and at York. We have about 10 sections of co-taught ELA and math happening at our middle schools, and almost 40 sections of different courses being taught at York in a co-taught setting. You know that we have some instructional programs at 3 of our elementary schools, at our middle schools, and at York as well. And then we have some of the specialized programs, for example, the ABC program serving students on the autism spectrum at Hawthorne, and some other programs at other schools as well. So while I know you may have seen the previous slide, I don't know if you've ever seen this kind of information. The federal government requires everybody to report on the extent to which students are spending time in different kinds of settings to monitor whether or not districts are providing the least restrictive environment for students. And so what you see when you look at these data is that actually compared to our peers, more students in Elmhurst are spending more time in less restrictive settings than some of those peer districts. So you'll see that we have almost 70% of our students spending 80% or more of their time in a general education setting, compared to about 55% for our peer districts. And this pattern actually of sort of having students more included holds true when you look at demographic groups, so subgroups, as well as different disability types with some exceptions. In terms of our staffing, we have 88 special education teachers who work in those self-contained and sort of resource settings where they're providing support via co-teaching or push-in or pull-out. We also have 160 assistants. Sorry, excuse me. No, thanks, I'm okay. 18 nurses and 86 related service staff, which are our social workers, speech and language pathologists, and so on. We also have staff that work with students who have specialized needs and hearing and vision that come to us from the cooperative that we're a part of. And I think you know that we also have 4 of our instructional coaches are specifically focused on special education. So it's a pretty big operation. Overall, about 20% of our teaching staff are special educators. They have about 9 years of experience on average, compared to a little bit over 10 for our general educators, and the vast majority of them you'll see have at least a master's degree. One of the themes that comes out of the feedback, and I'll mention it again, from staff and parents actually, is the sort of dedication, caring, and skilled nature of our special education teaching force. So that's something I just wanted to call out. This is just maybe not specifically related to our delivery of services, although it's interesting to note that the funding that we receive and that we spend on special education services, more of it comes from state and federal sources than does our funding overall. So that was some background on who's providing services and to whom, and so now we'll get into the delivery of those services. I'm going to be using this model that I talked about before to frame that discussion. I'll try to sort of talk about what we're doing in each of these areas, what people are saying about what we're doing, and then any other data that we have that kind of gives us some insight into what's going well and what's not going well. If you get lost along the way and I'm in the weeds somewhere, feel free to let me know, and I will do my best to come back. So we'll start with identification. Federal and state law really kind of defines the process for determining student eligibility for special education services, and that process is, an initial request for an evaluation that can come from staff or parents, that initial evaluation, and meetings that accompany those steps. We provide best practices documents to help our staff understand what that process is supposed to look like and the timelines. There are very defined timelines that have to take place around identification to help our staff understand sort of what the expectations are for identification. Over the last 3 years, I think I don't know if it was on the previous slide, or, oh no, it's on this slide too. We identified about 200 students per year. A lot of them at the preschool level. And so we've kind of been in a steady state. So if you look at the numbers of students who are transitioning out, which you may remember was around 75, the numbers of students who are graduating, and then the numbers of students that we identify, we kind of end up at a fairly steady state in terms of the numbers of students receiving services. One thing I will just note is that I'm only talking about students with IEPs here. I'm not talking about students who may just have a 504 plan, which relate to other kinds of supports that they may need. And I can tell you, at least anecdotally, at least at the high school, there's some concern that the numbers of students with those kinds of needs are increasing. As part of the identification process, districts are required to have a system of support in place to make sure that they are intervening and providing supports prior to students being identified. In other words, we're trying to make sure that we are checking to see if students don't just need some short-term kind of support or intervention before we identify them as really needing those special education services. And that's really the area where staff say that that's our biggest challenge. So they are very clear that we need a more systematized approach to that system of supports, that it needs to cover both academic and sort of behavioral and emotional areas that we're not as comprehensive as we should be. And they mentioned a couple of other issues related to pressure and workload about doing identification, but by far the biggest issue is related to this kind of systematic system of supports. I'm going to move quickly here, but if you have questions, feel free to interject, or there'll be time at the end.
So Marianne, yes.
Yep.
So what the last statement, is it because there's a lot of, it's manually intensive? Is that what, I'm trying to get a sense of what you mean by the systematizing?
I think what it means is making sure that across our schools we are clear about when students need support, what the support should look like, the data that we collect about those supports, the management of that data, about the fact that we've provided those supports. It's all of those things together. Yeah.
Really looking at the whole process and systematizing it all.
Yep.
Great. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Should be no problem. So once students are identified, become eligible for special education services, they get assigned a case manager who is a special education teacher, and their actual individualized education program is developed. And that really serves then as the official record of the kind of services that they'll receive. The case managers take primary responsibility for writing IEPs. They use input from all the students' teachers and other sources. We don't provide any specific training around writing IEPs, although again, we do provide written sort of best practice documents, almost a handbook, although it's not one book, it's different documents that talk about different topics for staff. And most of the coaches actually reported that they do work with teachers on IEP goal writing. What the staff tell us, and administrators in particular, about IEPs and IEP goals in particular, is that they do feel like there have been some improvements, and there's still some work that we can do to continue to improve on that. We wanted to look at the quality of IEPs ourselves, in addition to looking at what people were telling us about what they saw in the IEPs that they are involved with. And so what we did is we selected a representative sample of students that was intended to cut across different grade levels and also different disability types to try to be representative of the types of students that we have receiving services, and looked at two particular elements of their IEPs. The first thing we looked at is we're going to get into some jargon here, the present level of performance, which is a really important part of the IEP because it defines where the student is, and that kind of sets the baseline for the goals that you set for the student and how you want to move them forward. So some of the quality criteria that we looked at, and what we did is the state actually has some work that they've done on high quality IEPs, and so we referred to their resources and set up a rubric to look at IEPs. And some of the criteria that we set up for looking at present level of performance, for example, around the specificity of the descriptions, and some of the other areas that you can see here. You'll notice that there's one bar at the bottom there that's pretty small, and that's the part of the descriptions of present levels of performance that was sort of the weakest, that the fewest of the IEPs we looked at met that quality criteria, and that has to do with making sure we're providing data in relation to typical peers. The next smallest bar is about making sure that we have data from a variety of sources. So those are some places where we can think about improvements. We also looked then specifically at IEP goals, and again set up some kind of quality criteria for those. Most of the criteria were met for most of the goals, so that's I think actually a really good thing. The two criteria where we see the lowest percentage of goals meeting those quality criteria are related to describing the conditions under which students would meet their goals, and again, the specific assessments or measures that would be used to track progress on those goals. You might start to see some patterns here. So once IEPs are written, that really describes, the services that students will receive and the settings that they'll receive them. Then it comes to the school to actually make a schedule for a student and, get them to meet with their teachers and be in the courses that will provide them with those services. So in terms of the feedback that we got from staff, the biggest challenges seem to be at the elementary and middle school levels with our resource teachers, because those teachers are typically working across grade levels and at the middle school level across content areas. The times that they can get with students can be limited, and it's especially, I think, true at the elementary level. So if I'm a special education teacher who's assigned to work with 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and I have students who have reading and math goals, and there are 3 sections of 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, it becomes challenging to make sure that I have time to get in. And what I want to do is push in and work with those students while they're in their reading block or their math block. It becomes challenging to just the logistics of the schedule to make that work. And the result is that our teachers are feeling a sense of time pressure and that they're running constantly. The other thing that happens, of course, is that students are also participating in art and music, and those are all great things, but they also limit the times that teachers can meet with them and when those cross grade levels. Some of the other challenges that come up are not so much about scheduling, but more about do we have the courses and sort of options for programs that we would like to have for students. So there are a couple of areas that specifically got called out, like at the middle school level, for example. Students can be in a co-taught ELA or math course, but then we don't have similar options in social studies and science, and so the supports that they can receive in those courses look a little bit different, and people would very much like to have more co-teaching options available. The other issue is that sort of comes out really clearly is transition center parents who really want more academic options for their students, and very specifically some options to work with College of DuPage and make sure they can get some academic programming for their kids. The other big need is options for students who have those behavioral or emotional needs, and how we can support them in whatever the right setting is, but making sure that we have a way to support those students. To make sure that we can deliver services to students in an efficient way, if you come back to my example of that teacher who's trying to work across grade levels, we do have clusters of students in certain classrooms, and that makes sense, and lots of times those students have similar kinds of needs, and so it makes sense for them to be in those classrooms together. But when you have that more inclusive environment, and you may not have teachers who are accustomed to working in that environment, that can create its own challenges. And so that's one of the other big issues that comes out, especially from general education teachers, is that some of those challenges. Another issue that comes up relates to just making sure that we have the best expertise to meet student needs. So if I have a student who has goals in reading, I obviously want to make sure I have the best possible reading, instructor working with that student. And so making sure that our special education teachers have that depth of expertise and content knowledge. If it's not reading, if they're working with students in that social studies class, to what extent do they have the depth of knowledge that would be really helpful to make sure that student can be successful in that class. It can be difficult because, again, those teachers are working across grade levels and subjects, and so that's another challenge, I think, that comes up. At the high school level, again, just because of the size and the numbers of students that we have, those teachers tend to be embedded in departments, and so the challenges of sort of them having the opportunity to gain the depth of knowledge and understanding of the curricular resources and the standards is just not as great as you see at some of the other levels. Obviously, the heart of everything that we do is the instruction that we provide to students. And as I mentioned before, we have a pretty experienced and qualified special education teaching force. We know those things don't always translate directly to the quality of instruction or to the kinds of student learning outcomes that we see. It's also really hard to systematically measure the quality of instruction, not just here in Elmhurst, but anywhere. So I'll talk a little bit about what we do know about the quality of instruction and also instructional supports from the data that we do have, which is some staff effectiveness data, some student perceptions of instruction, and then also feedback. So what we see when we look at staff effectiveness data, our teacher evaluation system tells us that our teachers are very highly proficient. So I guess that's good. The green and blue bars are showing you the highest levels of performance ratings that we have in our teacher evaluation system.
Marianne, I'd like to interject here, and I'm sorry for doing this, but that data looks like it doesn't make sense, because why are they getting such a discrepant rating in their summative when their ongoing observations throughout the year don't indicate that? And the primary reason is that we are struggling, let's just say, to get our parasystem aligned properly to where we had some issues with assessments that caused us to design a system a certain way. That system we knew had to evolve, but it still has flaws. And so what's happening is the student growth piece is coming out as showing that students are perhaps exhibiting more growth than they actually are. And so then when that gets combined with the performance portion, it skews it to where their final summative rating is not always accurately representing what our principals think their final summative rating should be. In other words, our principals would tell you that their final summative rating should relatively mirror what their performance rating is, but because we're struggling to get the student growth piece incorporated properly into the summative evaluations, that's skewing their final performance rating. So that's something that we continue to work on a little bit at a time. We made some adjustments this year. We expect to make some adjustments next year, but that has to go through a committee structure that's established by law. So.
So I'm going to turn to student perceptions. The data that I'm showing you here is from the 5 Essentials survey from last year, where students are asked about their perceptions of instruction and lots of other things, and we'll look at some other data later. Oh, and I think my highlighting disappeared. There are some very faint blue boxes that you'll see there. The numbers that you're seeing is a scale that runs from 0 to 100, with 100 being really, 80 to 100 being really well above average, and then going down from there. And so the blue coloring that you may be able to see if you have the slides in front of you are indicating scores that are above average. The yellow are indicating scores that are below average. Where you see the bold, that's indicating where there are big differences between our students with IEPs and without IEPs. The first number that you see in every box is the students with IEPs. And the second number that you see in every cell is the students without IEPs. What this is sort of telling us, if you look at the math instruction and you can sort of faintly see some of those blue boxes, is that students are generally agreeing that they're doing rigorous work in math, although there are some differences. You see that bold between students with IEPs and without, that go in the direction that tells us that students with IEPs are not feeling like that instruction is necessarily as rigorous as their peers without IEPs. When you look at the English instruction, you'll see there are some below average numbers there. These data are all reported by school because that's the way that the data are reported. There's no kind of overall district summary for us here. And the perceptions of academic press, which is really about the teacher's expectations of students, they're pretty much average or above average, and there are some differences here and there, but there's not sort of a clear pattern there. So what do our stakeholders tell us about the quality of instruction? And is that there is some variation. There's a continuing need to work on differentiation and inclusiveness. Our general education teachers definitely want more supports in their classrooms. They want more hands on deck. They also want more strategies to work with their students. Again, everybody is really, really clear about the fact that our special education staff is really hardworking and dedicated. The other areas of feedback relate to, again, this idea of sort of increasing the depth of knowledge of our teachers to make sure that they're well positioned to support students with IEPs. Everyone really, really sees co-teaching as a strength. They recognize that it's not necessarily the same, that the level of quality in some co-taught classrooms may be different than in others, but they really are very positive about co-teaching in general. And the last thing is that both assistants and the folks that work with assistants really want some additional training for them to be able to work with their students. What's also relevant to the quality of instruction is what we're doing to support the quality of instruction. And so as you've heard about before, I think from Dr. Henderson and others, we're working a lot on differentiation through the workshop model, and we'll be continuing to work on that and expand it in other ways. We also have other structured professional development that we do. There's coaching, there are D205 courses, there's mentoring, and so on. It's always difficult to measure the impact of those kinds of supports. It's hard to know what gets translated back into the classroom, but we do know that people are really positive about those learning opportunities, and that instructional coaches are seen as a big strength. And we do actually collect regular data about our coaching work. And so the logs for our special education coaches show us that they are in fact working with both general education and special education teachers, which I think is a positive thing. They also show us, though, if you look at the types of supports that they're providing in those highlighted areas, about a third of their work that they coded this is from last year's data, are related to planning, modeling, and feedback on instruction, which is a smaller percentage than we see directly related to instruction from some of our other instructional coaches. Yeah.
Can you go back? Can you say that again one more time to make sure?
So when we look at just these couple of areas that, at least in my interpretation, are most directly related to support for instruction, so providing feedback or modeling or things like that, that's about a third of the time of the cases that our special education coaches last year logged for us. And that percentage is is smaller than what we see for some of our other instructional coaches.
Also, can you compare what that is? You recall what that?
I don't. I knew somebody was going to ask me that, and I realized I should have the number, and I don't. So I'm sorry. Yeah. So once students' IEP goals are established and instruction is happening, student progress is supposed to be monitored quarterly. Because students' goals vary, the ways that we measure progress on those goals also has to vary. And we don't prescribe a particular set of tools or processes for how we want teachers to measure student progress on their goals, although we certainly have it embedded in many of our curriculum, resources, things that can be used for those purposes, and we do provide supports and ideas of what could be used. However, the feedback from administrators and other staff is very clear that they want more tools, and they really want a menu of options in terms of tools to measure progress, but also processes and training around those processes to make sure they're consistent. Our parents also want more information about student progress, so that's a particular, communication comes up as a theme, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but specifically communication about student progress is something that comes up from parents. And of course, our own work looking at the IEP goals suggests that the specificity of the measures is an area where we could make some improvement. I'm going to mash together some of the final boxes in my model of special education services here and talk about annual review meetings and transitions. So at least once a year, students' IEPs are reviewed and students are transitioning either within their schools or across schools. We don't provide training for folks on how to run an IEP meeting, be it an annual review meeting or another meeting. Again, we provide sort of best practice documents for them, and our newer case managers also get support from our special education supervisors. In terms of what people say about our IEP meetings, our stakeholders, there is, as with any human endeavor, some differences in how meetings operate. It wasn't the kind of big area of improvement noted by staff or parents, although there are some specific issues that came up. For example, elementary parents really want to make sure that they get documentation ahead of meetings so that they're prepared to participate in them. Our assistants really want to either be included in meetings or to make sure that they get information about the outcomes of meetings so that they can be in a position to support their students. And we will be actually collecting some additional information specifically about IEP meetings in a survey that we are trying to finish up just now. With respect to transitions within schools, the kind of way that looks now is our case managers disseminate information to teachers about students' IEPs. They give them a summary. Whether or not there's time for them to have conversations with teachers about students and about their IEPs varies across schools and just depends on the time available and so on. This is an area that our parents really felt strongly was an area for improvement. They want teachers to be able to hit the ground running with information about their students and not to have to, sort of start from ground zero. Our administrators point out that there's a getting to know you period for all students. Doesn't matter if they have IEPs or don't have IEPs, like that happens every year regardless. And you do want teachers to establish their own relationships with students and sort of their own strategies for what will work with students. But I think there's still some ways in which we might be able to improve upon making sure that people have the information they need, at least about accommodations and supports to begin the year with. Again, we provide some best practices. When you're talking about transitions across levels, we provide some of those best practice documents to help people understand what that process and those meetings should look like. We also do a fair amount of communication. For example, when students are moving from elementary to middle school, there are parent nights. Case managers across schools meet together and talk about the students that are transitioning. There are tours for students. There are tours for parents. There's a fair amount of effort put into trying to smooth the transition as much as possible. It doesn't mean that there aren't ways that we could do better. And transitions is a time when parents are especially interested in having that information and communication happening really well among staff. The other group that talks about transitions as an area of improvement is actually early childhood staff. And I think maybe it's because the programs look fairly different at Madison than they do in our kindergarten classrooms. And so, they would like to be able to try to think more about what the alignment could look like. In terms of communication and collaboration among staff, I think that a big element of our kind of overall strategy as a district is to work with professional learning communities, and that's our kind of way to systematize the use of data and really move student learning forward, and PLC time is something we've invested in as part of our contract and so on. At the elementary level, PLCs are usually those grade level teams. At the middle and high school, they tend to be kind of grade and subject level teams, like an 8th grade ELA team, for example. And again, because those staff are working across, at the elementary and middle school level, across grades and subjects, they just can't get into all the PLCs that ideally they would be in to know about all of what's happening with all of the students that they are supporting. It's just not feasible. And that's something that it isn't, of course, the only time for collaboration that happens in school. So special ed teams are meeting often, or they're meeting to talk specifically about a student's IEP goals, or they're meeting to talk about very specific issues with a particular student. But it is a big vehicle that we have for collaboration among general education and special education teachers, and they really want it. They would really like to have as much of that time as they can. Again, at the high school level, it's not as much of an issue because the teachers tend to be embedded within a department, so they can get into PLCs more often. At Madison, where it's just a different kind of staffing setup, they feel really good about the collaboration that they have, and there's a real sense of teamwork. They have those related service providers in the classrooms with the teachers as well. All the teachers are certified as special educators and early educators, so it's a kind of a different approach there. This isn't specific only to special education, so other teachers like our EL specialists also run into this same problem because, again, they may be working across grade levels and subjects. But we really spent, after we did an initial set of interviews with principals, we went back and actually met with all of the elementary and middle school principals again to really dig in on the scheduling and collaboration issue. I can tell you, Kathy and I spent a lot of time looking at schedules, Kathy more than me. And really to try to diagnose some of these issues. And having done that, I'm not sure we can ever have a situation where we have all the collaboration that we might like to have between special education and general education teachers happening. But there are probably some things that we can do that might help with that.
I'm going to interject one more thing here, too, as relates to that. Part of our membership with District Management Group, they changed kind of the format of how they are operating this year, and it includes a one-day on-site visit. And so we're going to avail ourselves of that by plugging into some of their expertise on elementary scheduling. So they're going to spend a day with our elementary principals and other staff members and really help us work through some concepts about elementary scheduling. And we're hoping that that'll help us get some forward movement on some of these things you see about collaboration or getting teachers, their grade level assignments or all those kinds of things that are coming up. I mean, it won't solve everything, but it is a way for us to just kind of keep the issue in front of us and keep trying to find different ways to identify opportunities for improvement.
Okay, so the last piece on implementation relates to communication and collaboration between staff and families. Beyond the kind of required quarterly progress reporting, we don't have any specific requirements about how often staff should be communicating with families. The case managers usually take the lead in communication with families, although some teachers are communicating regularly with all of their families of all of their students regardless. What people tell us about this is the number one thing, at least from the parent point of view, that they feel strongly about. Parents want more information about how they can support their students, about what their students are doing, especially at the early grade levels, and again, that piece around progress and or lack of progress. The one group that's a little bit different is the Madison parents, who are very appreciative of the communication that they get, and especially of some of the software that Madison uses that lets them see pictures and videos and things that are happening in the classroom. Okay, so that was a lot about what we are doing, and now we're going to turn to the piece around, well, if we, how are those things relating to the outcomes that we want to see for students. So we'll talk a little bit about student support, a sense of support and engagement, and then also some of the academic student learning outcomes. So obviously we would like our students, both with and without IEPs, to feel included and supported in their schools and in their academic work. And we kind of get a mixed picture depending on what data you look at with respect to those outcomes. More of our students with IEPs tend to be chronically absent than their peers. If you think that attendance is a good measure or some kind of a measure of student engagement, and they participate less in activities and athletics at York, which is the place where we have the best data about this compared to our peers. Some of those issues, of course, may be interrelated with their disabilities, so it's hard to, sort of draw a perfect inference about what this means. These are the same kind of data we were looking at before. This is about students' perceptions of the kind of support that they get. So again, looking at questions related to do they feel like they are respected in their schools? Are they getting support from their teachers and peers? And so on. And so again, the coloring is a little bit off here, but most of what you see is average to above average levels of, sense of support and engagement. I'm not showing you everything here. The report that I think you have, the draft report in the documents, has a even bigger table than this. But for example, if you look at the measure related to student and teacher trust, which is about students feeling like their teachers treat them with respect and listen to them, you see that it's really, they're pretty high numbers there, and there really isn't kind of a clear pattern of differences. Sometimes the students with IEPs are feeling more supported, sometimes less, and it's sort of not a clear pattern happening there. In terms of safety and some of the other measures that are not all showing here. Generally, our students are feeling safe. They're not reporting anything out of the average in terms of teasing or bullying, and mostly they're reporting feeling respected by their peers. It's definitely fair to say there are differences across schools, but in general, students with IEPs and mostly without seem to feel supported and safe in their schools. When you look at the types of achievement that, we usually measure, for example, on our school report card or in our district key performance indicators, we generally see lower academic performance for students with disabilities. That's maybe not especially surprising and is probably related in some ways to students having disabilities. So, for example, you will see on some of these measures like PARCC and SAT that fewer students are proficient. Our graduation rates are lower for students with IEPs. Enrollment in post-secondary education is lower for students with IEPs than without. What we do see on the positive side, because our IEP goals are intended to be more specific and individualized to the students, that in some ways may be a more relevant measure of whether or not our students are making progress. And so of the IEP goals that we looked at when we looked at that representative sample, we do see that students are learning and growing. So of all the goals we looked at, students were either on track to meet or had met 81% of them. So I think the question is just how do we best define success in terms of those student learning outcomes in college, career, and life readiness, and how can we make sure that the student learning growth that we may be seeing in IEP goals to the best extent possible is reflected in some of these broader measures. We'll be doing a little bit more data collection, as I mentioned, to look at outcomes related to student sense of preparedness and also their parents' sense of preparedness. So there's a couple more short surveys that'll be going out over the course of this spring. I know that was a lot of information, and so we spent a lot of time in the trees, and I'll just step back out to the forest for a minute. So, I mean, when I sort of look at all of this information, I think there are some things that are some bright spots and things that are going well in terms of inclusivity, kind of a sense of team and dedication, and having the staff. Good staff. IEPs are mostly being written well, and in terms of outcomes, our students seem to feel like they're being supported, and we do have evidence that they're learning and growing. We do have areas of improvement, and I think some of the big ones are that systematic system of support, better progress monitoring, some of those options related to behavioral and emotional supports for students, some opportunities to improve collaboration and communication, especially with parents. So in terms of next steps, I mentioned some of the data collections we'll be doing. The other one that I didn't mention is we will be doing more of a deep dive on co-teaching because we know this is something we really want to look more closely at and see what are the areas where we may need to provide some additional supports. What my plan is as far as next steps is to take this information and go back to the folks that we met with who contributed to this information, meet with them and have them help us think through what would be the priority outcomes that we want to achieve and what would be the right sort of levers to pull to get to those outcomes. So what are the areas of the things that we think we can improve upon? What are the ones that we think are really most likely to get us where we want to go? And that will help us, I hope, across all those groups, kind of get a little bit of a, maybe not a consensus, but some different views on how we can best react to all of this information, because it is a lot of information. And then Kathy and her team will be tasked with putting that all together and coming back to the board with a plan for what we'll be doing next later this year. And guess what? We got to the end.
Thank you. That was a lot of information.
I know. Yeah. You're welcome, and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you want to go, Shannon?
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've been waiting and anticipating this. I guess for me, one of the most important things is what's happening in the classroom. So the slide that you talked about, like planning, modeling, and feedback, well, maybe that's not in the classroom, but planning too. Planning, modeling, feedback was only a third of the time spent for a special education teacher No, or
That's for the coaches, the work that the coaches are
the
doing.
instructional coaches?
The special education instructional
Okay,
coaches
okay.
specifically.
I wasn't sure exactly
And that's
who that
last
was.
year's data.
So that was the special ed instructional coaches. What would you like to see that at? That
I mean, I don't know if I have a number in mind. Kathy, I don't know if you have a number in mind.
I think what we, next up in terms of follow-up, Shannon, as Marianne said, that was the data from last year, which was the first year for the special education coaches. So what I'd like to do is pull the amount of time that a general education coach from their second year, that was the goal we set for our coach. If you remember Dr. Henderson sharing like next steps for the instructional coaches, and one of the priority areas was for our special education coaches, one, to continue their coaching with special education teachers, but also increase the amount of time that they had access to general education teachers. So answer your question, I would pull where our general education teachers, or I'm sorry, our general education coaches were their second year, and I would want to see that be similar in the amount of time that they're spending on actually coaching teachers through those coaching cycles.
So I was trying to get a sense of what do we think the percentage should be? And then, if it is coaching, right, in the classroom, which is probably the majority of the time, what else are they doing, and how can we automate it? How can we offload it? How can we do other things? I guess that's how I'm thinking about this
Yeah.
whole thing is.
I mean, I think, again, the data that I'm looking at was from the first year that we had special education coaches, and I think everyone was so delighted to have folks who had that kind of expertise that they asked them and pulled them in many different directions. And so some of the things that they were, being asked for was, as you'll see in that chart, like some general information, like help me understand, how to best serve students with special needs, which was, I'm sure, useful, but wasn't directly coaching that person in their work in the classroom. So I don't know if that gets at some of what you're.
Yeah, it does, and that's effective, and that's what's going to happen the first time, and that's what we heard about when we first got instructional technology coaches, then went to instructional coaches. So I guess we kind of know. I mean, thinking I'm observing, we kind of know the pattern, right? And if coaches are helping teachers prepare, I mean, that's good too, because that effectively gets into the classroom.
There's nothing bad here that's happening. It's just a question of where do we want their time, where can their time best be spent? Again, that will get us where we want to go.
Yes, that's the key.
I guess part of what I'm asking too is to try to help teachers, the special education teachers, not feel like they're running all the time. Like you mentioned that, how can we, what are the best techniques that we can, how can we help those teachers? And that's really where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to go back and look at all of this, and my guess is there's not one answer, right? There's probably going to be a variety of things that we can look at. Some may be related to scheduling, some may be related to staffing, some may be related to just structuring collaboration time, and making sure that time is most efficiently spent. I mean, I'm sure there are just a variety of things that we'll get at some of that. I don't know, Kathy, if you want to add.
Talk about that in May. Will that?
Yes,
Okay.
and actually, Shannon, we've in talking with our core team and then the special education coaches, as you can imagine, we've been digging deep into this information, and I have to publicly, on the behalf of our team, express our appreciation for Mary Ann's deep dive and helping us quantify and qualify some of the processes related to special education. And one of the things we hypothesized is we look at the data, if we become more inclusive, that means our students with needs are spending more time in our general education settings, which requires collaboration. So those are all good things. And the way that we've staffed, we've shifted to some degree, but perhaps not enough to account for that if those students are now spending more time in general education and we're getting more into that differentiation and those guided math and the guided reading in the general education, that's leading to that stronger sense of urgency on behalf of both the general education and the special education teacher to spend more time collaborating. And the things that we've done in our schedule has actually sort of been impacting their ability to do that as frequently as they'd like. And where do we want our students or our teachers during the day is with our students. So when are we going to find time for that to occur is our challenge.
Margaret?
Yeah. But can we talk a little bit more about that? So I'm trying to make sure I understand. Are you talking about more of the PLC models, or are you talking about co-teaching, all of the above? What?
I would say all of the above, Margaret, because even in a solid co-teaching model, those two teachers are planning together and have that specific dedicated time. And that's a shift for a teacher, too. You know, you have the most control when you're doing something by yourself. But now if I'm working with Mark, we've got to learn, and it's described as a marriage, you know, and you have to learn to live and work together in the classroom, and teaching is very personal, and that takes time and that takes collaboration. So that's one piece. And then also being more inclusive. If our students that are identified for needs are spending more time in a general education classroom, then how are we making sure that those supports are in place? And for that general education teacher to feel confident and that that student is being successful and participating in that classroom and in the instruction that's taking place. And that takes collaboration time too. So that's what we're going to be digging into deeply. And as Dr. Moyer said, even looking at perhaps district management groups saying, okay, this is everything we want to do, and how do we take advantage of the resources we have to target our priorities.
Are you still?
One more quick.
Sure.
So I'm wondering if this ties back to one of the early slides that you put up on IEP development. And if I can find it. So it talked about one of the scores of comparison to typical peers. And I'm wondering if that is somehow related to this this discussion on the need for more time for PLCs and or this co-taught model. I'm wondering if that somehow comes out, or if that's related at all.
I think yes, but I also think it is closely tied to assessment and what our assessment practices are for all students, and how, like, what technology we can use to make sure that our teachers have access to how general education, how their typical peers, because it is very easy to pull national norms, but that's not necessarily reflective always of the students with whom I'm sitting next to in a classroom in my own community. So when we look at comparison to typical peers, pulling that information from the typical peers in the district and in the school and even in the classroom, and even when you look beyond some of those academic pieces like executive functioning and social emotional learning, of how do we quantify a typical peer, and a lot of times it's observable behaviors. So I do think it's closely linked to assessment, and then how do we make sure that our teachers can use technology to help support getting access to that information. For general education teachers as well. I wouldn't say that that is specific to our special education
Yeah, and
teachers.
I think it relates to that point about progress monitoring as well, and sort of having the right tools and measures in place and the processes and then the systems to be able to access that information when you need it.
Karen?
So to that point, so the plan that we will see next will include that too? Or is that?
Well, I think, again, what we want to do is identify the highest priority areas that we think will, again, move us in the right direction. And my suspicion is that progress monitoring will be one of those areas. And so I personally, I would anticipate that being part of the plan.
Because I think that we can see it even in Gen Ed, and this could be a driver to get it throughout the whole district for all students, but for all staff.
Right.
And have it be a smart system that, gets the data and kind of does some analytics itself and program it to do that. Yeah, okay.
Karen, I think you're right about that. I think that kind of goes back to the MTSS piece and the fact of how important Tier 1 is. And so I think that some centralized coordination to make sure that we have appropriate systems in place that are consistent and things like that are other things that are going to, come out of this. Mary Ann's concept is to go back and get some input on these results, like she said, and then we want to come back to the board. And what I'm anticipating when we take a look at the highest yield, highest leverage priorities that we want to start with, that doesn't mean, I'm looking at this needing to be like a multi-year plan. It's going to take a couple years to get what we need, but we will be able to identify outcomes, action steps, and be able to show something concrete and tangible.
And what's the big hits, right? What are the heavy hitters that's going to make the most impact? So you're looking at it from that, because I totally see it next step.
Yep.
So it seems like, there's kind of four main themes that emerge, and there's a lot of data, obviously, to digest, which thank you. Goals, IEP goals, communication, education for the adults, like training, it could be the parents, educating the parents, and scheduling. And so some of those, like scheduling is complex, and there's a lot of moving parts, and you can't always spread people, thin, but a lot of these are processes that it seems like with very little, I guess I would say, increased resources, but just sitting down and figuring out what is going to work on a really tangible level with the people involved could yield us some results that are measurable. And this is great to do this, and I think it's great you're going to go get more information, but I feel like I look at this and I go, are we just going to keep admiring the problem? Like, when do we get something that says we're going to actually do this, and we'll come back with the plan and you can see the results?
Our plan would be to come back with that in May. I will tell you, like with scheduling, I'll give a very specific example. Even in this process, because we are coming up on the time, like we have to look at staffing. I think there are some things out of there that could potentially lead to looking at our resources differently. But I will share that as principals, and as we looked at that, no one felt like just adding more to do the same thing was going to get us different results. So what resources can we use to dig in deeper? And I think we want to take advantage of district management group and look at that deeper immediately. And we'll be doing that before May because we have to look at staffing. The other piece that I would say, we want to make sure there is a lot in there. There are things that involve certainly student services and learning and teaching, general education and special education. We want to make sure we identify what are those high impact, high yield that may take us more time, but then get us those long-term outcomes that we're looking for. And then are there things, and I see some of the things along the communication line. For example, there was something, parents wanting reports in advance. That's an easier thing to do in a short amount of turnaround, and we can start doing that. So what we would bring back in May is making sure we have that clear plan with those outcomes and amongst the different stakeholders, what those different steps would be. And one of the things that is important, I think, to all of us is what are we going to use to measure those outcomes?
So Madison, and even the data shows that there's a satisfaction level for the most part at what's going on at Madison. And so it would seem that if we know that what's happening there around communication and around goals and the way, Madison also does parent education and, helps parents, provides resources to help them. And, an educated parent then can help support their child and also support the classroom teacher. And, the frustration and anxiety comes when you feel that you have no information. So is there a way for you to work with Madison? The model at Madison, I know it's not realistic in the, you can't have a special education teacher, like Madison has more those certified teachers, but can you use that as a model? Because, it feels like with a people are, for the most part, satisfied. And so then something obviously happens when you get to the next level and the satisfaction, it doesn't improve. It just seems to go down.
Absolutely. I can see us involving in that and looking at how do we take some of those things, so same things in the structures when you're working with more than one teacher at that time, and what are some of those parent education pieces that parents would like to see us continue through the elementary and middle.
And I know it's included. Where and how is a transition center integrated in this information?
Parents, from the Transition Center participated in one of the thought exchanges. They were actually combined because there are so few students. We were worried about people, feeling like they weren't going to be anonymous and be able to say what they wanted to say. So we combined them into there was a high school transition center parent section of the feedback. However, in every case that's relevant to the transition center, parents identified that they were talking about the transition center, so it was very easy to see what comments were specific to that group. And there's kind of a full summary in the longer report about what every single group said about every single item.
All right, anybody else? All right, I'll look forward to what we get in May. Thank you. Next is PMA projections. Welton. Mr. Welton.
All right, Welton here. I'm here to talk about the financial projections. Projections are forecasts of the future, so they never come out exactly right because we use estimates throughout, and with any forecast, the further out into the future you go, the less accurate the projections are. That's just part of the normal disclaimers. With projections, these projections do not include the referendum revenues or expenditures. These projections are just the operating funds of the district. And on the revenue side, we always talk about property taxes. Property taxes make up 83% of our operating revenues. And so as far as the assumptions go, the biggest assumptions related to property taxes are the CPI and also the new construction EAV. But the CPI, we know that we have 2.1% was what the last tax levy was based on. 1.9 just came out in January, which will be the next tax levy. We tend to talk about the 2018 CPI of 2.1 related to next year's budget, the 19-20 budget, and the 1.9 will be about the 2021 budget. And then, so then beyond the 1.9, then we have estimated 2.0% for the 4 out years. Then the new construction EAV, this year we had the large, or actually we don't know what it will be, that is estimated at 73 million, but it includes the TIF 1 increment coming onto the tax rolls in 2018. And then as you see, 40 million going out, and then 32 million in the out years. Then as far as EAV doesn't have a big impact really on the revenues. It really impacts more the tax rate. Then on the expense side, we are mostly salaries and benefits, so 63% salaries and 12% benefits. So that means we are 75% made, 75% of our expenditures are related to staffing. You see way up on top the other financing uses. Those are the transfers to the operations or to the capital projects fund for the summer maintenance. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Other key expenditure assumptions is the current teacher contract through 21. And then, so in this, we've added 1 administrator for next year. 2 teachers and 1 support staff are currently in these assumptions, and benefits are at 7% increase per year on health insurance. So as far as the staffing, we had estimated staff flat in after next year for the next 4 years, and that's related to the enrollment is projected rather flat from 2020-21 through 23-24. These numbers are really tiny on the screen, so I'll just go to the chart here, but I'll talk about the numbers. So in the base year, the 19 budget year, it's projecting an end balance of 57 million or 46.76% of budget of expenditures, annual expenditures, and then going out the 5 years with small decreases each year to out in the 5th year, 47,815,512 of 33. The fund balance would be 33% of annual operating expenditures. This projection does include 3.5 million in the maintenance, the capital maintenance projects every summer, as Todd had put in his plan for operating for the summer projects. But we do these projections prior to the staffing that's coming up in the near future. So it gives you an idea of the projections give you an idea of how we're trending, so that we can help to make decisions about the staffing that's coming up in March. And that's all for the financial projections.
John.
Maybe you can clarify this, or Dave, maybe you could. We talked about we approved last meeting the staff increase of 4.1, but you have as your assumption that there's only 2 point, what did you say?
1 administrator, 2 teachers, and 1 support staff.
But wasn't the staffing thing for administrators?
But it was 3 administrators because of the elementary principals. We moved the fine arts coordinator to an administrative position, so that wasn't included in there. When Chris developed these, he started developing these a couple months ago, and so when he says these are estimates, so as you saw in one of my recent newsletters, every month we get a little more precise with each grade level as to what's going up and what's going down, so we're pretty confident that we're going to be at flat staffing this year overall, or close to it, but it varies at different grade levels. And then, we were waiting on the special ed report and all those other kinds of things too. So we got the final staffing numbers by February 1st at the middle school and the high school. And so by this Friday, Dr. Wohl is expecting to have his first draft staff for all grade levels that we're going to look at cabinet. And then we expect at the next cabinet meeting, we'll have a more precise idea of exactly where we're at this year. Because some of the things that we're anticipating too over the next several years that may affect those lines is that the recent contract, we're going to have a lot of people over the next several years electing to go into the retirement track. And that might affect some of that as well. So we're almost monitoring in real time in some cases. I mean, Chris, you might answer that differently a little bit, or Jim, if you wanted to contribute, but the bottom line is Chris put assumptions in there.
Yeah, we're definitely early in the staffing process, and this is a difficult thing we do every year when we try to estimate and do these projections, because we're so early in the staffing process.
Yeah, I understand. It might be a small number anyway. It just seemed to differ from what we just heard. That's why I was asking.
Right.
So
it's a good question.
Chris?
Sure, thanks, Chris. And just to echo Chris's point, I think several years ago we pushed up when they delivered this so that we could have some sense of the trajectory that we were on ahead of making personnel decisions. And so, again, we don't get precise in a funny way. We don't have our budget set till after our fiscal year begins several months later. And so you kind of wait till you see the answers for the test. But in this case, you're trying to get an idea from an order of magnitude how close are we to running out of money at our cash flow point, which is the one thing we're really looking at here. And so this tool is basically used for us right now, is being able to direct Dave and his staff as they put together their staffing program. Are we going to have to do anything proactively to staffing, which is really the only lever that we have to pull, for a given set of assumptions. So I think in looking at this, I think we all look at this and say, I think we're very prudent in allowing Dave to make those changes and add the staff that he needs, because I think we have the cushion to do it. And so that's one piece of this. The other is, to the extent that we want to run scenarios about, and again, budgets are budgets, but these are projections, and these are meant to have levers pulled. And so if I change CPI, or if I change new growth, or if I change enrollment, what happens to these lines? And that's a tool that I think Chris uses with PMA as we kind of run ranges of scenarios if things were to come up that we wanted to talk about, or we started getting a little bit closer and that cushion started to get a little bit less, and we needed to be a bit more precise in kind of where we are, or how much cushion we build into these things. But I think, as you see here, particularly focusing on the next 2 to 3 years, which is kind of the horizon that you're on. You never really get to years 4 and 5, because if they're horrible, you're making changes now. So that too, and then just a couple things to remind. One is for fiscal 19. It shows a $3.5 million deficit, and you have to put that together with 2018 surplus because of the tax shift that we talk about every time this comes up. And the second is in looking at this, it allows us to make some judgments on pre-funding some of the construction costs, as we talked about last board meeting, where we can use some of this fund balance to save interest by going ahead, and this helps us figure out how much of that can we use and still feel comfortable that we're not going to run out of money on the operations side before we go issue those bonds to do it. And so this will be something we'll be constantly looking at going forward as we look to put some money into that CapEx program and then potentially borrow it back later and save some interest. So again, it's a tool to manage our low point.
Karen?
Just a few things, Chris. It looks as though, if I look at the revenue, we are getting less from the state based on the evidence-based funding. We typically get 7, and we're getting 5. So that's the first time we've seen that. So I just wanted to note that. Secondly, when you have for 2018 on the local revenue, the tax base assumptions, I just wanted to clarify, or have you clarify. I know that some people have been asking me, we've got this bump of 30 million. No, that is just 1 year new revenue gross that based on the tax rate, it's just the base that you take the percentage that we would get. That's not total revenue to us.
30 million is not revenue, it's EAV against which assessments are levied. So we get
a
a rate
percentage
against
of that.
Yes.
So I just think it's important for us to communicate that so it's clear to the community.
And as far as the state funding, it's 5% evidence-based, 3% other state revenue. So it's a total of 8% state.
Okay, so are you now breaking it out just so that we know? Or I thought we got state revenue and then we always got other. So that's I want us to begin to look at that. Are we getting less?
The evidence-based funding is actually up 185,000 this year compared to last year.
And when you say that enrollment is flat, is it because we've got high enrollment right now, so it's flat because, you know what I'm saying? It's not a low enrollment that we have. We've been climbing, and so you're just saying flat from?
I guess I didn't mean exactly flat. I meant relatively flat. We're talking about next year 107 students, 27, 18, 4, 46. So just small increases in enrollment. So we continue to increase when we've seen that a lot of our comparable school districts are going down. Our enrollment continues to go up, but we're looking at small increases.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Okay, next is the adjustment of superintendent base salary for the 2018-2019 school year. This is following the review and evaluation of the superintendent. Is there a motion?
Yes, this is me. Okay. My motion is this. As provided by paragraphs 4 and 5 of the July 1st, 2017 through June 30, 2020 performance-based superintendent's contract, I move to increase the superintendent's base annual salary for the 2018-2019 school year from $233,003.52 to $241,478. with the increase payable in equal installments over the remaining regular payroll periods for the 2018-2019 school year.
I'll second.
Discussion? Chris?
I can start off and please chime in. I think just a little bit of perspective here is important to understand what we're doing tonight. Almost 4 years ago, we hired Dave to help us create a foundation for a 21st century education at Elmhurst, and then to help us get there. Since arriving, Dave has taken many of the successful aspects of our district and worked to pull them together to build a foundation from which to continue to build District 205's reputation as one of the best districts in the state. Of particular note, and by no means as an exhaustive list, I'd like to point out a few of his accomplishments. He has, first and foremost, promoted a culture where all students are at the center of decision-making. He has attracted and developed leaders while providing them with responsibility, authority, accountability, and avenues for growth. He has prioritized and invested in professional development, what he likes to call building capacity, at all levels of the organization, from sessions with national thought leaders to instructional coaches to true professional learning communities. He's evolved and enhanced the curriculum, strengthening connections between the grade school, the middle school, and the high school, articulating that curriculum across and also between the levels, but then also across the buildings, creating a more unified district both academically and culturally. And last but not least, I would point out that he has managed to distill and articulate a long-term facilities plan and tirelessly led our efforts to successfully pass a referendum to remake our learning spaces across the district for 21st century learning. And these are just a small piece, as you heard tonight with the special ed presentation and the other presentations that we talked through. He's changed the conversation that we have here at the board table, and I very much appreciate it. Many of you have heard my Moneyball baseball analogy. We're not the Yankees. We don't have the luxury of going out and hiring the most expensive free agents. We have to develop a culture and a competency around growing great players. That also entails accepting occasional errors and using them as learning opportunities, because even gold glovers commit errors. If we do it right, though, it also means that our players become attractive targets for other teams. Although it's hard to believe anyone would consider leaving our fine town of Elmhurst, we do have to be cognizant of the competitive environment for talent, particularly from states that aren't basket cases like Illinois. Leadership transition is extremely disruptive to an organization and its momentum, which we are fortunate to have a lot of, which is why at this critical point I think it's important that we recognize Dave's accomplishments and contributions as our leader, while incentivizing him to continue with the hard work of executing on the myriad plans that we have in motion. It is my sincere belief that Dave has the potential to be a transformational superintendent, and I strongly support providing Dave with a competitive compensation package which keeps him in Elmhurst through the next phase of our journey and hopefully through the rest of his career.
Jim.
I have kind of a simple perspective on what we're doing tonight. When we hired Dave Moyer 4 years ago, we hired him at what I will call a sub-market rate of pay. And we've done very little in the last 4 years besides increase his paycheck at the rate of inflation to correct that. I think we're comfortable with Dr. Moyer, and this is just one step to get him closer to the average of what a superintendent in a district of this size and this caliber actually makes. He's currently well below that.
Well, I had one other thought. I've also heard from the community that they want stability in our leadership, and this is a way to do that, to maintain stability with the leadership in the district.
Jim?
No, you go.
Sorry.
He wants to.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add. No, you go. I just wanted to add to Shannon's thought. In Illinois, the average tenure of a superintendent is 3.5 years. And I think that goes a long way to explain a lot of the sad state of education in Illinois. I mean, there's a lot of factors there, but if you want to have a world-class organization, you need world-class leadership, and you need that leadership at all levels of the organization to stick around for a long time.
John?
That's far more articulately stated than I was going to state it, but that was the same point. Or I'll take credit anyway.
All right, any other comments? Okay, go ahead.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes, 7 ayes, no nays, the motion passes. Next on the agenda is the adoption of resolution approving a multi-year superintendent contract. And I'll begin before the motion with a statement. One of the most important roles of the school board is to employ and evaluate the superintendent. The board completes rigorous goal setting, discussion, and evaluation of the superintendent at multiple points in the year. These critical evaluations and discussions take place with great thought given to where we as a district have been, where we are, and where we want to go. In the last 4 years, under Dr. Moyer's leadership, our school district has experienced increased opportunity for students and staff. As a board, we think it is important to take a moment and reflect on some of the significant achievements that have been made through the collective work of our teachers, staff, administration, engaged community, and the leadership of our superintendent. Our elementary students' classroom experience has been enhanced through the addition of the workshop model, Fontes and Pinnell, Eureka Math, Defined STEM, Acceleration Time, Makerspaces, and the introduction of dual language programming. Our middle school students have new learning opportunities through the addition of Acceleration Time, Project Lead the Way, Makerspaces, semester-long unified arts topics, and language paths that result in improved acquisition of world language. Our high school students have increased opportunity to challenge themselves and explore through interdisciplinary learning opportunities, a manufacturing lab, and beginning next year, they'll have the opportunity to participate in the business incubator and the first Intro to Engineering course. Our instructional practices continue to expand and improve for all students through the addition of instructional coaches in all buildings, instructional coaches for special education, inclusive practices, learning targets, increased rigor, the workshop model, and continued development of professional learning communities. Our principals and teachers have expanded opportunities for growth through the creation of District 205 University, increased professional development, and opportunities to share their learning with peers and staff. Our teachers are being honored for their work and presenting outside of District 205, bringing pride to our community through their hard work. Under the leadership of Dr. Moyer, our financial position has strengthened. This administration has created a system of program analysis to determine plans for improvement and resource allocation, and has presented fiscally sound recommendations to the Board of Education. The commitment at the administrative level to exercise fiscal responsibility has earned District 205 the highest distinction of financial recognition by the Illinois State Board of Education. Additionally, District 205 has been awarded the Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting, has a AA+ rating from Standard & Poor's, and a AA1 rating from Moody's. These credit ratings lower the district's borrowing costs, ultimately saving the taxpayers money. The growth of District 205 and leadership of Dr. Moyer is being recognized beyond the boundaries of our community. This past summer, Dr. Moyer was awarded a scholarship to be one of 32 U.S. educators to visit Helsinki and study the Finnish education system, followed by a global leadership summit in Berlin on the influence of technology on society. District 205 is one of 40 school districts across the nation accepted into the Innovation and Transformation Leadership Network, a joint venture between the American Association of School Administrators and the International Center for Leadership and Education. Recently, District 205 was recruited and accepted into Harvard University's Scaling for Impact program, and separately will be presenting at the National Model Schools Conference. Dr. Moyer continues to nurture growth and innovation for all within District 205, and there is no doubt we are beginning to establish ourselves as a national leader in education. Throughout the last 4 years, the district has engaged our community in its long-range planning. Dr. Moyer has led and participated in superintendent coffees, PTA discussions, advisory groups, school-wide discussions, surveys, steering committees, Q&A opportunities, and large community forums to help set the path for District 205. Most significantly, this engagement centered around the development of a master facility plan, a multi-year plan providing space for all-day kindergarten at neighborhood schools, STEM opportunities, and improving learning spaces at all of our facilities. This was a significant task to develop, refine, and ultimately gain approval from our community. In November, our community supported the $168.5 million master facility plan with a definitive majority vote. 62% of our voters approved the plan. This is challenging work in a community with high expectations for its educational system. And at this time, we believe Dr. Moyer has successfully met the goals and objectives set forth by the board in the current contract. As our community begins implementing the 5-year master facility plan, there will be a significant need to maintain high-quality leadership. During this time, we believe the district is best served by a leader with a deep understanding of the master facility plan, established relationships within the school district and the greater community, demonstrated fiscal responsibility, and possesses the capacity to continue to address the ever-changing needs of our students, our staff, and our community. Dr. Moyer has demonstrated his capability to accomplish the challenging work of leading and growing District 205. Our board believes our most prudent path is to provide our community with the continuity of leadership. The Board of Education is in agreement to enter into a new 4-year contract with Dr. Moyer with compensation and benefits that are commensurate with other suburban school districts in our area. As is our practice, goal setting, performance, and compensation will continue to be identified and reviewed annually. The major financial elements of the new contract, 4-year contract are a base annual salary of $249,922. Annual increase in the base annual salary consistent with CPI, Consumer Price Index, used for the property tax cap, and the average of raises for administrators up to a 3% maximum increase. Additional compensation for performance is at the discretion of the board. Payment for up to 5 unused vacation days each year, and a payment to the Illinois Teachers Retirement System of up to $17,000 in each of the final 2 years of the contract in order to transfer 2 years of Dr. Moyer's service in Wisconsin to the TRS. Entry into a new contract is accomplished by the adoption of a resolution which finds that Dr. Moyer has met the goals of his current contract, terminates his current contract, which ends at the end of the day on June 30th, 2019, and approves the new contract to begin on July 1st, 2019. And with that, I will ask for a motion.
I move to approve the resolution authorizing July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2023, performance-based superintendent's contract between the Board of Education and David A. Moyer as presented by the board president.
I'll second.
Any other discussion? Jim?
Just like to point out that, this is fairly routine. As long as I have been on the board, this happens every couple of years. The board's customary practice has been to extend, or I should say, offer the superintendent that we plan to retain a new contract a year before the existing contract expires. By letting, again, the custom and practice has been by letting a contract go into its final year without being replaced by a new contract, kind of signals the superintendent that you don't plan to renew. So this board has been doing this every couple of years, well before the time I got here. And really the only change is that we won't have to do this again for 3 years instead of 2 years.
Chris?
I think to your point, Jim, I think that one serious piece of consideration that we had was the build plan and the number of years that we have for the build plan and making sure that we get ourselves well into that build plan too. So I think when you look at 4 years, I think that we've very much tried to sync that up with the building plan we have.
Okay, anything else? Okay.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes, 7 ayes, no nays, the motion passes. Next on the agenda is approval of administrative reassignment.
So the item C, Dr. Wohl has accepted, effective July 1, a position as a superintendent for the Benjamin School District, feeds into West Chicago. And so we are very happy. Thank him for his service here, 5 years of service here, and very happy that he's able to continue his career as a superintendent. And I personally thank him and wish him well. It also means we have to find somebody to do that job. So my recommendation is that we reassign Dr. Cohen to that position, and my reasons are that it's not that easy to replace an HR position. Typically, it's one of the areas where somebody coming from an education background may have the least amount of formal training. And so I like the idea of moving in this direction for a variety of reasons. One is that we can ease and mitigate that transition by having Dr. Cohen work together with Dr. Wohl during the staffing process and before he leaves to get to know the functions in the department and the work cycles and all of those kinds of things. And also point out that some of Dr. Cohen's qualities, I think, lend himself to being successful in that position. He's a very strong relationship builder. He has former union president experience and has negotiated contracts. With his high school background, tends to have a very intuitive knack for staffing, which is a big part of what goes on every spring. And as Chris Welton pointed out, a big part of where the resources go. And then I also think it offers him an opportunity for some continued personal growth, to be able to manage a department, to be able to deepen his understanding of different district office functions. So those are kind of my reasons why I think that this is a good way to go by transferring him and then posting his current position and filling that with going through a traditional interview type process.
Our motion.
Sure. I move that the Board of Education approve the reassignment of Dr. Mark Cohen from his current position of Assistant Superintendent for Innovation and Growth to Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources. This is a cost-neutral reassignment.
I'll second.
Discussion?
Two things. One, I want to say thank you to Jim Wohl and wish him the best. I also want to congratulate Dr. Cohen, Mark Cohen, on this new role. One of the other pieces that was mentioned here is internal movement and development, and that was a big piece of what we're talking about. We want to make sure that we're always looking at our students and making sure they're learning and growing. A great way to model that is to make sure our staff is learning and growing, and I think this is one way that we can make sure that our staff continues to learn and grow continually, and always looking at internal opportunities for promotion and growth. So thank you to both of you.
Jim?
I also want to thank Dr. Wohl for his service in the district, and I'm sorry to lose him, but I am also thrilled for him that he's going to become a superintendent, and I think that is that's a lucky district that gets you to be their superintendent. And point out that Dr. Wohl and Dr. Cohen also share a common background in that they were building principals, and personally I think that is a very important experience set to have for the assistant superintendent of personnel position. So congratulations to Dr. Cohen, and Dr. Wohl, we'll miss you.
Shannon?
Yeah, I also wanted to thank Jim, especially with your skills with negotiation. I think you're able to come up with creative solutions that meet the needs of both sides and understand, just have a good understanding of that process. So thank you, because that's not easy. And welcome to the new role. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Just like to say congratulations, Jim. Congratulations, Mark. And Jim, you'll pass along the referee's uniform over to him, won't you? Okay.
Go ahead.
Mr. Bloom,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner,
Yes.
Dr. Harrell,
Yes.
Mr. McDonough,
Yes.
Mrs. Steuben,
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio.
Yes, 7 ayes, no nays, the motion passes. Next is the approval of Conrad Fisher Elementary School principal.
So exuding one of her finer qualities of patience, Irene Villa is in the third row, and she has previous principal experience and has experience with dual language programs, is herself a native of Columbia, and so is bilingual, and has a very, very intense commitment to student learning and student growth, very passionate about the classroom and high-quality classroom instruction, very much in tune with looking at data and trying to make informed decisions about what students need. And so we feel very fortunate that she has agreed to join us, and pending your approval, we will formally welcome her to Elmhurst.
Motion?
I move.
Go for it. You're the alumni.
All right. That the Board of Education, I move that the Board of Education approve Irene Villa as the principal of Conrad Fisher Elementary School with a start date of August 1st, 2019, and a base salary of $129.97.
I second that motion.
Discussion?
I recently got the opportunity to meet Irene Villa, and am just very impressed and excited that she'll be joining us and working at Conrad Fisher. Some of the ideas that she espoused, just as Dave Moyer mentioned, commitment to data, a commitment and understanding and appreciation of diversity, of working together, of respecting community values and principles, and in her words, also just being a no-nonsense type of principal. All key features, all key things that are important. You talked a lot about collaboration and working not just with the community, but with the other staff, the other principals in our community, to make sure Conrad Fisher continues to move and grow and be shining star in our district. Thank you.
Dr. Harrell,
Yes.
Mr. McDonough,
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner,
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen,
Yes.
Mr. Bloom,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio.
Yes, 7 ayes, no nays, motion passes. Welcome to District 205. Okay, Superintendent's Communication, Master Facilities Plan Update.
Okay, so the first thing is, I'm about as close to speechless as I can get, but you know I can never be 100% speechless. So, well, I, greatly, am greatly appreciative of all of the kind words. It's obvious that I didn't do all that stuff myself. So, I really do have to thank the teachers who have been just unbelievable. All of those things that you mentioned, I mean, when you think about what that has meant to their practice and their daily life the last couple years, and how they've risen to the challenge to be able to embrace some of these things, it has been impressive. And the teachers can't function well without high-quality principals, and I think that we have strong principals in our buildings. And the budget doesn't really balance without Chris yelling at me every Tuesday morning. You saw Mary Ann's report tonight, the highest quality work. You've seen what Bev does. You've seen what we've tried to do with innovation. And of course, all of those things involve a myriad of people in the organization, and you supported all of them. And you should feel good about taking some of those risks yourselves to help us get to this point. And of course, Mary walked in here and was asked to start a coaching program, and we gave her about 45 days to do it. So, I mean, the coaches have been maybe one of the most integral pieces of any of the things that we've done, but obviously I can't take all that credit, but I thank you very much for the kind words. Master Facilities Plan. The Edison crew met tonight. The meetings have continued with school-based specialty area groups, meaning media specialists and all those kinds of things, and we had to reschedule a lot of them. The weather did not cooperate, but we are getting toward the end now, so you can see there's a furniture committee meeting coming up. There's a second all-day kindergarten committee meeting coming up. The next finance committee meeting will involve an update on various aspects of the planning process that will ultimately be shared with the board. And then we have our core team meeting in March, and so we will be able to extend out kind of another timeline over the next couple months to make sure everybody's clear on all the various different things that are going on related to the planning process. And that's really all I have right now. I will say that I felt good about the first all-day kindergarten committee meeting, and I have touched base with some of the people that have been involved with the subcommittees, and have also been keeping touch with some of the people that have been involved in these planning meetings at the schools for the ones that I haven't been able to be at. And my feeling right now is that we're moving along well. And that we have very engaged people that are sharing a lot of ideas that are valuable to our architects and our facilities people. So it's been a good process so far. Not a lot to update right now. And that's it for me, so thank you.
Tweet of the week.
Good evening to the board. Before we head into Tweet of the Week, last month we did honor and recognize some of our national board certification teachers who had earned their certification, but we did miss one, and that is Shannon Ford at Madison. She actually renewed her national board certification, which is even more of a dedication to her growth. So congratulations to her. And now the moment you've been waiting for, tweet of the week, goes to Edison Elementary at Edison D205. And this is some kindergartners' interpretation of what it might be to be old. Edison's old kindergartners celebrating 100 days of school. Hashtag Edison Hard Work. Again, our hashtag of Ignite D205 and Elmhurst D205. They crossed the 100-day mark of school, so you can only imagine the kind of growth they've had coming in the doors as bright new learners and then conquering that 100 days of school. So this is their ode to us being old. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now, just one last thing. Just to show you who runs the communications department, I tried to strong-arm her on Tweet of the Week, and she wouldn't have it because there was a fourth grader at Edison doing a Bob Dylan presentation, and I told her that that had to be Tweet of the Week, and apparently she's showing me who runs the communications department tonight. So.
All right, board communications. Any board communications? All right. Then we have a few upcoming meetings. Tuesday, February 26, 2019, regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting, 7:30 District 205 Center. Monday, March 11th, 2019 is a special Board of Education meeting here in District 205 Center at 7 o'clock. Tuesday, March 12th, 2019 is a Finance Committee meeting at 6:30 here in District 205 Center. And Tuesday, March 19th, 2019 is a regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting at 7:30 here in District 205 Center. If there's nothing else, then we are adjourned.